Well, good evening. My name is Lauren Engel, and I'm part of a group of three people who are presenting information about Creswell Appendix B. And this is the appendix that talked about a young lady who was a Chinese immigrant in the Toronto school system and her experiences there. This video is meant for Ed Research 5640, so if you were looking for something else, something better, something like a Beyonce, something like that, you are in the wrong place, so you might want to go back, start over, and do another search. But for us, we're talking about Creswell Appendix B. And I find it interesting that myself and James and Jay, we all are educators and in different roles in public school systems. And we kind of latched on to this particular case study, I believe, because it's something that's likely close to all of our hearts. We desperately want kids to succeed and want them to do well. And we look at students who don't bring a lot of advantages into a school system, like the young lady who's presented here. And I don't know, it sort of spoke to my heart a little bit, this whole thing too. I would want to know more about her experiences and what her view of schooling and the schooling experience was like so I could help her to succeed. All right, well, moving through the screencast-o-matic over here. There we go. Our research questions for this article really were two. How do expectations from a variety of sources influence the developing identity of a young Chinese immigrant student? We're going to go into what some of those expectations are here as we move forward. And secondarily, what are the challenges of supporting immigrant students in a North American school system in regards to multicultural education? Another, I think, interesting thing about this particular case was that this isn't necessarily an American school system. This is a Canadian school system. And there are certainly some things that American and Canadian schools have in common, but there are also some really distinct differences about Canadian schooling. And to not have this young person be in a totally American context was not only unique, but it's kind of fascinating and interesting. So the main points of this particular article, let's see if we can make this a little bit bigger. There we go. Main points of this particular article really talk about tensions between homeschool, tensions between the interaction of parents and teacher experiences of schooling, and everybody's different perspective and how those different perspectives can be experienced as conflicting stories. In the main points of this particular article, the ideas and contexts that might be in conflict for the student were identified and called out as the narrative progressed. There was the conflict between the student's idea of who they should be and who they should not be that was shaped by all sorts of external factors: peers, popular culture, music, media, prior experiences. What teachers think a student's experience should be, also shaped by prior experiences and their understanding and beliefs of what immigrant students might be experiencing or should be experiencing. And certainly the parents' understanding of, from their point of view, of culture and language and everything else about what the schooling experience should be for a student. I think even in a monoculture setting, even if you think about just American students in Wyoming, everybody brings something to the table about what school should be and how school should be experienced. And we do poorly by students when we just assume those things and don't say them out loud. Well, this study focuses on the daily transitions that the student makes between home and school, and it's intended to be just a glimpse of the intersection of really complex influences that shape the life of this particular student. And if you've read Appendix B, I think you get a really strong sense of what that's like from her perspective. The author did a pretty nice job of trying to describe everybody's point of view and what that feels like if you're a kid stuck in the middle of all of that. Nobody in this particular case study is wrong. I think that's another interesting thing about it. Everybody is speaking truth as they see it. And because everyone is speaking truth, you can't pick out a place where you say, well, this is the right way to do things and this is the wrong way to do things, because the author is describing just what is. And what is neutral in many ways. It doesn't have a right or a wrong attached to it. Another main point of this article, it was coming from a point of view of John Dewey's philosophy of the interconnectedness between experience and education, and that was used as a theoretical framework. And what John Dewey was talking about in this particular philosophy is that we all experience life in our own way, from our own perspective. And true learning comes from getting knowledge or understanding and putting it through that screener or through that filter of our own sets of experiences. Um, the the narrative is set into this three-dimensional narrative inquiry space, which is a wonderful way to say things. There's three dimensions that go into this. The first is the spatial dimension, the actual physical area space where most of the story takes place. And the researcher was planted himself right in the middle of this student's middle school. There's a time dimension that goes along with this, and that time dimension is between 2001 and 2003. And there's a social personal dimension to all of this, and that's the students' interactions with students, teachers, peers, parents, and other members of the community. The researcher himself used a whole variety of narrative approaches. He plunked himself down in the middle of this school and became a participant in the life of the school. He collected documents. He collected conversational interviews. He was present at important events. He was present in just everyday life. He took extensive field notes after each school visit. He interviewed people formally. He talked to people informally, and he had interactions with participants as well. He didn't just sit down and run people through an office and ask them formal questions. He talked with people. He got to know them, and in doing so, he kind of had an in with this community in many ways, and was able to get information perhaps that he wouldn't otherwise be privy to. Documents were all archived and analyzed for recurring themes, and the biggest recurring theme that came out of all of this was the theme of tension between, as it says here, home, school, and peers. That was the primary theme that this study unearthed. Well, there were tensions identified in the school setting. Initially, if you read this particular article, the student tried to hide her identity because she thought it would be a hindrance to acceptance. I think all of us can put ourselves in a place of a middle school student, not wanting to be different and wanting to be just accepted and understood. And language was a huge barrier to that, because she felt if she couldn't speak English, she wouldn't be accepted by her peers. Home language was sometimes viewed as a low status option as compared to English used by peers at school. And what I took that to mean from this article was that you and I as adults might think of Chinese as a huge big plus, as like a bonus. But when the currency that you're working with is acceptance by American peers, or Canadian peers, knowing another language isn't a bonus. It's something that gets in the way. It's something that might not be seen as good as the language that the peers you're seeking acceptance from have. There were tensions identified in home. This young lady's parents were really concerned about what was happening to their children, their two daughters, inside a North American culture. That they were gaining some things, certainly. They were gaining cultural understanding and language of their new country, but they were losing some things that were very important to the family list, such as the language that they came from China with. While the student was concerned about fitting in with a peer group, that conflicted at times with some traditional expectations of behavior that parents, especially the mother, had for how young girls should be acting. The teacher identified in all of this had some tensions as well, identified some cultural differences where, to him, education and pursuing education and taking care of academic tasks were very important. However, the family felt otherwise and prioritized helping the family and helping the family business as more important than the academic work the teacher was expecting. Well, the main points of this article, one of the biggest one was that immigrant students experience tensions that pull them in many, many directions from the places that we've already identified: family, school, and their own native ethnic community. there are tensions, as we said earlier, that are associated with adolescence in probably every culture on earth, but they're exacerbated by differences in this perspectives that are discussed between culture, between school, between home, between what parents want, between what teachers want. And understanding the challenges faced by immigrant students can help inform us as educators regarding curriculum, school policies, and practices. There were undoubtedly some things from this article that we can all glean about how we can approach students from another culture trying to assimilate into ours, and at the same time not wanting to give up or not wanting to totally abandon all of the things that they bring with them. Well, there are some aspects of this article that certainly demonstrate a tradition and genre. The article demonstrated a narrative study in a couple of ways. It was a collection of stories from individuals. You can call the students, the teacher, the peers, etc., all those different things. They tell of the students' experiences, certainly, and you can go down the list, B, C, E, D, all the way down to the very end where it says stories were restoried into a coherent fashion. I doubt that the researcher, setting himself down in the middle of all of this, heard a story that had a clear beginning, middle, and an end. This researcher certainly had to construct or restory all of these different things into a coherent fashion. We all agreed that this article was a really good example of narrative research methodology. The author did a good job of taking care of all of those things that are hallmarks of this particular genre of qualitative research, and also found clear themes that demonstrated the overarching theme of tensions. Spent a great deal of time within this setting in order to collect his data, and was able to really call out the overall theme rather than just keep telling different vignettes over and over and over. Another tradition that certainly could have been used is the author could have gone with the issue of the tradition of an ethnography, which would be more about the culture that was being represented as opposed to the story of an individual. And certainly if the author had wanted to do that, they could have gone with the Chinese culture that's there, working class culture, could have used any of these different things. And what would have needed to have changed was that the author probably would have spent less time in the school setting and more time within the greater community and the immigrant Chinese community of Toronto to understand what that community was like and what would be expected of a young girl who had come from a more traditional culture into this particular North American culture. Jay and James and I all agreed that we enjoyed this article very much. We found it to be interesting, we found it to be enlightening, and we also found it to be probably helpful in our work. Understanding what the experience of an immigrant student as an insider was very helpful. I can put my own expectations into the story. Jay might put his, James might put his into all of this, but at the end of the day, what we really want to know is we want to know what is that experience from a student's perspective. And Appendix B certainly did that for me, and I trust that it did that for you. Thanks very much, and look forward to reading your critiques of your appendices as well.